Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 quick match gameplay. This time around I'm once again doing the skaven with a bit of a rat rush build against the High Elves led by Jive Turkey on the map the Chill Flow. And that last match that I demonstrated with the rat rush build, I understood that it was against a bit of a shaky enemy build, perhaps not the most well deployed build, so I wanted to give it a shot again, try it against a bit of a different elven build, and see how it would perform in that sort of situation. So, this is a bit of a different elvish build here that I'm fighting against, and so I just wanted to demonstrate. The build otherwise is the exact same as the last video. Quick Head Taker, just before as a cheap, fairly mobile, fairly survivable Skaven Lord. Frontline composed entirely of Death Runners because they're my only Vanguard option. These guys also have very solid leadership, armor piercing, Weeping Blade, which reduces enemy armor, and they're just fairly mobile. They also stalk, so they're just very solid all around. And a backline of a bunch of ranged units, 3 units of Night Runners with slings, 2 more units over on the left flank, 2 more units of Night Runners with slings on the right flank, as well as 2 units of Gut Runner Slingers with poison. Basically just there to provide support, focus down enemy units that are being weakened by the Weeping Blade effect of Death Runners, shoot down enemy air, shoot down enemy lords on flying mounts, shoot down enemy cavalry, and just basically shoot down anything. And these guys are actually fairly survivable because they do have built-in 30% physical resist, and their melee stats, especially the veteran up to rank 4 like they are here, are not the worst. So, with over my opponent's build, he did go for a bit of a risky build, I think, but maybe not the worst against Skaven, who have a very weak or very low range, usually, for most of their units, and are incredibly susceptible to terror bombs. So my opponent did bring 2 units of Swordmaster's Oath, just to provide a bit of a front line, alongside Tyrion on actually not on foot. I thought he was on foot initially, but no, he's on a horse. Tyrion, of course, has very solid melee stats, and is an absolutely brutal melee combatant, but and against Skaven, against a lot of lords, he'll absolutely, actually against I think all Skaven lords, really, he'll absolutely trounce them in a one-to-one fight. He's very, very powerful in that sense, and while also being tanky. And behind that, 3 units of Lothran Seaguard, not shielded, but veteraned up somewhat, and these guys can definitely lay down the hurt on range, where Skaven have very low armor, and even in melee with their high stats, they'll definitely perform fairly well. More importantly, though, there are 2 units of Lyrian Reaver's Vanguard deployed here, just to kind of skirmish, like I said before, with the low range, these guys could definitely perform somewhat well if I was a conventional Skaven. And then 2 Frostheart Phoenixes over here, and these guys can of course cause terror, and I'm very susceptible to that. And they do provide a bit of a debuff. So right off the bat, the moment this match starts, I throw my Death Runner straight forward. You can see one unit over here does get focused pretty heavily by those Lothran Seaguard, and loses a model. In the meantime, these Lyrian Reavers do dive into the Night Runners, and you can see it takes me a little while. I'm moving my infantry forward, and you can see these poor Death Runners get absolutely shredded by the ranged fire, but the rest of the bunch do kind of gap close fairly effectively. In the meantime, the Lyrian Reavers are getting torn up by the Night Runners because Night Runners are not a bad melee combatant. Definitely, I think, better than Lyrian Reavers. My opponent does definitely do quite a bit of a, I think, clever move here, dropping the Frostheart Phoenixes, though he drops, unfortunately, both of them on the same target. You can see, though, rather than focusing the Frosthearts, I'm focusing over here on the Lyrian Reavers and trying to focus them down with my ranged fire. And I do send Queek into the battle with the Frostheart, and because these guys have very high physical resistance and decent melee stats against the Frost Phoenix's not so good melee attack, they'll actually be able to tank through it fairly well. Unfortunately, Death Runners, despite getting a surround, are not doing that well. They're not really oriented against lightly armored troops like Lothran Seaguard, and with Tyrion in the mix, he can definitely kind of rout and pressure these guys very, very heavily. And you can see some of these guys are routing. But fortunately, because they have very high leadership, they are actually recovering and coming back into the fray fairly consistently. This poor Frostheart Phoenix over here is getting focused on by ranged fire. I popped the speed boost on Queek, just trying to get him get into the fray. You can see the slingers are just throwing rocks at it. I'm just trying to whittle him down slowly but surely. And these slingers over here have pressured off the Lyrian Reavers because they do have a decent sort of ranged attack. And over here you can see the Death Runners are definitely wavering. They're definitely struggling a bit in the morale department, but at the same time they are holding their ground reasonably well. In the meantime, all these Night Runner Slingers are pushing forward into position, just to start lobbing away at these Lothran Seaguard, who are unshielded and will thus be very, very susceptible to all this Slinger fire. And you can see the volley does go in there and does about 400 damage, between, I do think it's 2 units of Slingers. So very respectable. And of course these guys are being debuffed, and so they're by the effects from the Death Runners. Now, in the meantime, this other unit of Death Runners is simply trying to shut down these Swordmaster's Oath, time down as long as possible. And getting their charge bonus off, these guys will actually perform somewhat effectively against the Swordmasters, though certainly not on like an equal term sort of situation. This Frostheart Phoenix, in the meantime, is getting torn down by Queek, while this other Frostheart Phoenix is getting slowly but surely slaying out with these Night Runners, probably winning, but not anywhere near cost efficiently. And what I'm definitely making a bit of a mistake here by not disengaging these Gutter Runners and not leaving this simply to Queek to just crush this guy in close quarters. In the meantime, these Death Runners have been shattered by the Swordmasters. And over here on the left flank, you can see the Death Runners aren't necessarily trading that well. And they're not really, they're meant more as a support unit than an actual functional front line. They're decent at shutting down cavalry, they're decent at weakening enemies for your other units as skaven. But it's my only option really if I want to do a Vanguard build, so that's why they're being used here. Over here you can see though the fire is coming in hot and heavy from these Night Runners with slings. The Lothern Seaguard is kind of getting swarmed all over by these Death Runners. Only Tyrion is really around kicking at this point, because all the other infantry here has broken off. The Lothern Seaguard will shortly come back. You see the Phoenix was forced to rout off, and over here Queek has to start taking these Swordmasters of Hoeth, while my Slingers actually, rather than focusing them, are simply focusing on wiping out the rest of these Illyrian Reavers. In the meantime, these 3 units of Slingers are simply whittling down this Lothern Seaguard, helping out these Death Runners. Perhaps causing a little bit of friendly fire, but that's okay. Death Runners also have a built-in physical resist, which makes them a little tankier than the stats would indicate. In the meantime, this Froststar Phoenix has dove in and terrified these Death Runners. You can see I'm dedicating this unit of Death Runners to mop up all these fleeing units. And my opponent does send this Froststar Phoenix over here to help deal with Queek, but shortly I'm going to simply target it with these Gutter Runners. Now, the slings don't do a lot of damage per shot, but they do have... but there's a lot of them. There's 90 models there, so they can definitely, or almost 90. So they can definitely do a bit of hurt. And shortly this Phoenix will simply fall apart and just die. I'm actually not entirely sure if it actually goes down or if it just doesn't. Yeah, it does go down. You can see it, the little bird there. Just got squished. In the meantime, though, these guys are kind of getting routed off. You can see this Froststar Phoenix over here, and Tyrion are getting surrounded. And despite the fact that Faint Interspost has gone down, Tyrion is simply not able to sustain himself due to army losses, and the game ends with a close victory. It's not even Pyrrhic. Now, this was a much more, I think, my opponent was much more aware with his deployment. Had a much more, I think, balanced composition, or composition that was much better, potentially shutting this build down, with the mix of Lothern Guard and the terror bombs from the Phoenixes. But I definitely think there was a bit of a... I definitely think this build is actually very competitive against most humans, or most human army options that they can run. Or, I guess, sorry, most Elvish options that they can choose to run. And that is for a variety of reasons. The first and foremost is that you really have to decide what you're going to focus. If you bring sort of these huge terror bomb units, such as the Froststar Phoenixes or Lords on Dragons, if you bring these, you have to kind of choose what you're going to dive with them. Any lower end cavalry, even Silverhelms, will not perform that well against Night Runners or Gutter Runners, because these guys do have respectable melee stats. Same thing is true for Dark Elves, actually. If the Dark Elves try to field Dark Riders against you, your Slingers will actually slug it out with them pretty effectively. If you try to recharge into your enemy's infantry rather than fighting, or into the Death Runners rather than slugging out with the skirmish units, the sheer volume of ranged fire will eat away at your troops at a tremendous pace. So it puts your enemy in very much on the spot. Makes them make some forces them to make some tough decisions, because you do just have so much volume. And you saw in that game how, despite my opponent's best efforts, he simply was not able to shut down all of the Slingers at once. And some of them definitely got a very, very sizable amount of damage in. Similarly, some of the Death Runners definitely did some work. They managed to wrap around. They managed to tear through the Lothern Seaguard. And while Swordmasters of Hoeth, of course, traded very well, these guys are not a cost-efficient counter to Death Runners, I don't think. Tyrion, of course, is a bit better than Queek, but it is a bit of an expensive investment. You can see the Illyrian Reavers just were not really able to do much of anything. Skaven, definitely with their built-in physical resist, are pretty competitive pick against most enemy skirmish options, because their physical resist is much better than the enemy's their enemy's armor usually. I can't at the moment. There's not really any skirmish unit I can think of off the top of my head that has armor that that would compensate or undo sort of the Skaven's survivability advantage, really, which is a little surprising given that they're rats. They are actually more survivable against most enemy range. Obviously, this would not be the case if we were dealing with some of the other factions, such as dwarves or wood elves with their plethora of magic arrows, or dwarves with their crazy armor. But in this case, it is definitely true. And yeah, obviously the biggest disadvantage usually for these sorts of units, the Night Runners, is that they just don't have enough armor piercing. But with all these Death Runners running around, you can easily apply all that massive debuff to enemies. If you get Queek into the fight, even better, because you can drop even Phoenix Guard down into a pathetic level of armor. And you can see that in this game, I actually had still a significant amount of troops remaining, and most importantly, Gutter Runners are not a terrible melee unit. So if push comes to shove, or they get out of ammo, they can dive in and contribute a decent amount that way. So I do hope this kind of gives you some inspiration. I understand that this is the same comp I ran before, but I wanted to show it against a different composition. because I've been trying it out more and just trying to get more gameplay with it. And yeah, I do hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, any questions about Total War Warhammer 2 or Quick Match or anything like that, be sure to post those down in the comments and I will respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.